Hello and welcome to lecture number 26 in this series. And I'm really happy today because I get to talk about some of my favorite smells, which are woody smells. I find, I and many other people indeed, find woody smells to be particularly uplifting and beautiful and clean and healthy and noble. And that's not always true, but most of them are, and in particular the last one here, cedarwood, we will come to it in a minute, really is a smell which I would put on par with incense in terms of its sort of almost spiritual sort of quality. Now, I'm going to start on a really somewhat sad note, actually, which is this sample, which, as you can see, is quite different from all the others and does not, in fact, belong to the perfumery kit from Perfumer's Apprentice that Spiros Drosopoulos put together. This is sandalwood oil. And it is sandalwood oil from before the fall. And by fall, I mean the virtual disappearance of sandalwood oil from the market because it had been over-harvested in its country of origin, which was India. The Indians failed to control harvesting of sandalwood trees, failed to regulate it properly. It was unsustainable, it ran out, and essentially the supply of high-quality Mysore, as it was called, sandalwood, practically stopped. I suppose there are some people who may have their own plantations or somehow have access to a small trickle of sandalwood oil who can still get it. But sandalwood, the proper Mysore sandalwood, has been replaced by sandalwoods of other origins, including things that are called sandalwood but don't really smell of sandalwood, properly speaking. So sandalwood from India, the real thing, which this is. So this sample comes from Dominique Dubrana, who's a French-born perfumer working in Italy, self-taught, an absolutely brilliant perfumer. And he kindly gave it to us. This is sandalwood from, I think, 20, 30 years ago. It ages very well, by the way. Now, the peculiar thing about sandalwood is that when you smell it, yes, it's woody, but what makes it special is an almost the smell of yogurt, a sort of milky, slightly sour smell against a smooth, sweet, powdery, but not overly sweet background. And it is absolutely extraordinary how within the sandalwood smell you have a core which is definitely woody, resinous. You have this powdery sweet thing behind it, and you have this powdery sour, milky thing in front. The main molecule in this is beta-santalol, which is far from easy to synthesize because the ring part is tricky. Now, I learned recently in a wonderful essay, possibly a book to be published by Claire Vukcevic, that sandalwood oil was actually used as a solvent. It wasn't necessarily intended as an odorant. It was used in what are called attars, namely perfumes. Attar is an Arabic word that means perfume. It was used in attars as the solvent so that you would distill, for example, some fragrant plant like Pandanum or Cypriol or something into a vessel containing sandalwood oil to dissolve it in. So this was quite remarkable. And sandalwood provided an absolutely beautiful, so to speak, silk cushion upon which the entire fragrance would rest. We have to wait something like 30 years or 40 years before the full production of Mysore sandalwood comes back on stream. The problem with many classic fragrances, in particular all the Chanels and many of the Guerlains and so on, is that they use sandalwood, good Mysore sandalwood oil, in important quantities in the formula. And although perfumers have struggled really, really hard to replace the sandalwood with synthetics. And in some cases, they've delivered an effect which is very convincing. The part that doesn't work is that the effect is convincing at one point in time of the fragrance and then falls apart. The aroma chemicals that they've used to replace the sandalwood somehow don't fade away quite as smoothly, and there's a bit in the dry down where you smell Chanel No. 5 and others where it doesn't look right. It's a sort of facelifted sandalwood. It's not the real thing. Sandalwood oil was never particularly cheap, and so chemists have spent a tremendous amount of energy developing fake sandalwoods, synthetic sandalwoods, and mostly they gave up on imitating the actual structure of beta-santalol because it was chemically impractical, meaning expensive, to actually make it. And they've come up with a lot of substitutes in which the ring system of the beta-santalol is replaced by a simpler ring system, commonly camphorinic acid structure. And they've come up with a lot of materials supposed to be sandalwoods. And you can see, I mean, let me put it this way. If I had come up with, this one is Bactanol, and if I'd come up with this in the lab, I would be mightily pleased. And it has the same overall timbre, the same feel as sandalwood, woody, sweet, with a slightly sour note. So it's a little bit like if you took a thin slice of sandalwood oil and lifted it off. The second sandalwood replacement or synthetic is ebanol. Now, ebano in Italian means ebony, so I'm not really 100% sure why they called it ebanol, but anyway, it's a nice name. Now, this one is a little bit stronger, has a bit more presence, and it's funny because it's as if it's focusing on a slightly different facet of the sandalwood oil accord. This one is woodier. It has it's more like the woody core of sandalwood oil, and it has a little bit of that creamy aspect, which is so strange because these are alcohols. Why should they have a creamy smell, which is typically associated with acids? It's an absolutely beautiful material. This ebanol is subtle, rich, faceted molecule. This ability of a molecule, by the way, to have what are called different facets, which sandalwood most definitely has, is a rather mysterious one. It's not known whether it's because it sits, so to speak, in odor space in a region, a bit like the region Four Corners in the US, where Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico are joined. If you're in Four Corners area, I suppose if you walk 10 meters either side, you're in 4 different states. Maybe the fact that these molecules have facets indicates that they are at a borderline point in odor space. These are really remarkably complex smells for what are essentially, at least in this particular case, I believe, pretty pure materials. So now I come to truly one of the most amazing synthetics in all of perfumery. It's amazing at all levels. It's amazing because of the smell. It's amazing because of the power. It's amazing because of how it's made. And it's called Javanol. Now, Javanol is head and shoulders above all other sandalwood substitutes because it really embodies much of the character of sandalwood oil in a completely synthetic molecule. Now, this molecule was discovered 30 years ago by a group that included Jerzy Bajgovic, an absolutely brilliant chemist at Givaudan. And it is most unusual because it contains two cyclopropane groups. Cyclopropane is a triangle of carbons. Now, cyclopropane groups are typically made by adding a carbon atom to a double bond. So you have carbon-carbon double bond, and you add a carbon and the bond becomes single and the carbon is joined up. That reaction, called cyclopropanation, is one of the harder reactions in organic chemistry. Givaudan, where these chemists worked, managed to make an industrial scale cyclopropanation reaction, apparently involving the use of reagent called diethyl zinc, which is pyrophoric, meaning if you open the jar, it catches fire and explodes. And they're doing ton-scale cyclopropanation reactions using diethyl zinc in order to make this material. And it is a brave endeavor. And they've managed to control it and make it commercially viable. This was, at one point, one of the more expensive materials in perfumery. Fortunately, it's enormously powerful, so that you don't need to use much in order to get the effect. And as a smell, it's just jaw-dropping. If you can get any closer to real sandalwood with a synthetic molecule, I would be amazed. This is so good. So the fifth material, if one includes the real sandalwood that I'm going to talk about today, is vetiver. And it's not a wood, it's a grass. And not only is it a grass, but it's practically a weed. It grows very, very fast, and it's very undemanding. Wow, that's strong. It's used actually, the plant itself is used, it has quite deep roots, which is where most of the smell comes from. It has quite deep roots that serve to anchor the earth around the roads, on the berms, on the roadsides. And so it's actually very, very common all over the world. And the smell is just totally wonderful. It's a combination of definitely resinous wood, a very strong licorice angle, and a definite smokiness, very smoky. Now, vetiver has an interesting aspect in common with incense, which is that it never quite smells like the actual material, the vetiver, the dried vetiver twigs. When I was a kid, my mother used to send me up the street to a Caribbean store to buy some of the twigs to put in drawers to send to the laundry. And those twigs had this magnificent smell, but in a very sort of, just like incense, in a drier, dustier version. And I think perhaps the longest running sort of dispute between perfume lovers is which is the best vetiver fragrance. And when I was a young man, there was practically a running battle between those who were partial to the Carvenne vetiver and those who were partial to the Guerlain vetiver. I was always a Guerlain guy, although once in a while I would be unfaithful and buy a bottle of the Carvenne just for a change. My favorite, actually, for some time, has been a weird vetiver that Guerlain sells, or at least used to sell, only in duty-free. This is a genius piece of marketing which totally escapes me. But it was a vetiver pour elle, for woman. And it had a bit more of a floral accord, and somehow, for some arcane reason of perfumery, the combination with the floral accord made the vetiver facet of dustiness come out more rather than less. The next material is called Vertifix, and that is I suppose, French portmanteau for green fixative. So yeah, it's a sort of material that doesn't have a lot of sort of romantic pretense to it. It's rather functional. I must say, in this context of really remarkable smells, Vertifix seems a little bit thin as an odor character. But odor character isn't everything, as we shall see in a minute. Now, the next one is familiar, perhaps overly familiar to absolutely everybody. And in fact, I'm going to open it rather carefully because I'm keen not to. I'm going to put just a touch of it. And that's, ooh, I can smell it from there. Oh, God. This is patchouli. Patchouli has a very strange history because extracted from the leaves of a plant related, if my memory serves me, to potatoes. The smell of patchouli repels insects, and moths in particular. And so the bales of very valuable cloth were packed with some amount of patchouli leaves, and so the silk would smell of patchouli when it got to its destination. And people really liked that smell, and they started asking for it as a smell rather than as a moth repellent. So what does it smell of? Well, camphoraceous, no question. Earthy, intensely earthy. Almost chocolatey, I would say. And it has a connotation of being rained on at a rock festival and smoking banana peel in the hope of getting high. So now we come to the 8th material that I'm going to smell today, which is Iso-E Super. Now, Iso-E Super is one of the most successful aroma chemicals, I suppose, of all time. I suppose the ionones may have been in their day as successful as this, and some of the musks, but Iso-E Super is a big deal. And it's a big deal because it's not very powerful. It's used in large quantities. And it belongs to a class of aroma chemicals that I would describe as effect aroma chemicals, not character aroma chemicals. Effect aroma chemicals are molecules which you put in a composition, they have a fairly nondescript, I mean, if I'm smelling it right now, yeah, it's a woody, smooth, slightly oily. What it does is smooth out the fragrance and give it what has been described very correctly, a velvety feeling. This thing is like plaster. You smooth out the surface. Everything is still there, but somehow enhanced, deepened, cleared. Just amazing. So the last one, but not the least, is cedarwood. Now, cedars have a special status among trees. They live to be very old. And I don't know if you've ever stood under a cedar. I know I used to go to Kew Gardens in London and stand and walk around and stand under the cedars. Cedars have this extraordinary thing that the low branches are quite high and they spread horizontally. They give a tremendous canopy with lots of room. It's like a ceiling, and they're very clean underneath. Nothing is falling from the tree. So they feel like these vast beings, these giants with a sort of protective aura around them. The smell of cedarwood, which is really the smell of pencils, has some of this character of craggy nobility that the tree itself carries. A smell which really, to me, embodies what I would think of as a woody smell. So sandalwood is too complicated. It is a woody smell, but it's just got so many facets. This is the essence of woody. Clean, dry, healthy. Thank God for woods.